But you haven't even told me how to use this ability, Taleon shouted, as the little white rabbit fluttered off into the distance, bouncing with rapid haste from place to place. Well, that's because I don't know how you use it. Just like I don't really know how you use your fire breath. It's your own ability, kid. I can't tell you how to use it, but it'll most likely be triggered in the same way that your other demonic abilities are triggered. Think about how you use your fire breath, for example. I don't have fire breath, so trying to teach you how to use it would basically be an effort in futility. I don't really understand it. Just take the knowledge of how you use that and try to change some things up. Think about what might make you, well, eat the bunny. Figure it out, kid. Experiment a little. You'll get it, Salas said, as he started stepping back towards Rico. While you're doing that, I'll try to get Rico some experience with her abilities. We need to break her of this fear of flying, and then we can start working on whether she has any other talents. You've wasted enough time. That rabbit isn't going to catch itself, he said, as he turned around, completely ignoring Taleon at this point. Ugh. Why did that guy have to be my teacher? He's startlingly unhelpful, Taleon thought to himself, as he turned his head, looking in the direction that the bunny ran off to. It was still running about in the field, seemingly just darting from place to place with no real goal, other than to move around very quickly. I mean, if Taleon was to try to catch it on foot, he might be able to. It didn't appear as if it was moving that fast, and Taleon was actually pretty quick on his feet. Maybe just physically eating the rabbit would work. No, it's supposed to be a demonic ability. Why doesn't he just tell me to use my fire breath? Enhance that, Taleon thought. Why does it have to be some ability I know nothing about? He said, pacing in the direction of the rabbit and beginning to scratch his head. So how do I do it? He said it's like Rico's ability, that I gobble up other people's demonic energies. I suppose I could ask Rico how she feels and what she's thinking about when she's using hers. But I bet stupid teacher would just say that it would only complicate things, make it more difficult. I've got nothing to go on. Well, I suppose I could start with hungry. When I'm using my fire breath, it's a strange feeling. It took a minute to get used to when I started doing it. At first it just happened by accident. I just felt something building up, a burp. And when I let it go, it was all fiery and stuff. So it's kind of sort of the feeling of needing to burp. Except I found out that if I hold that feeling of needing to burp, that the fire breath I produce is bigger. It was only after that I figured out that emotions had anything to do with it. My mom had grounded me for breaking some things, so I was stuck around the house for a while and not really happy about it. And Mother told me to start the fire for the stove, so I was planning on using my fire breath like normal. But for whatever reason, it came out much bigger than normal. And I eventually figured out it was because I was angry. I was upset with the situation. That's how I figured out that if I focused on being angry while I had the feeling of the burp, that the fire breath would get even bigger. But how is that supposed to help me now? I don't even know what it's like when I absorb demonic energy, gobble it up. How am I supposed to imitate a feeling that I can't remember? Don't know what it looks like, don't know what it feels like. And teacher just expects me to do it. Stupid jerk face, Taleon said to himself, staring at the white bunny hopping through the fields. He sat down for a moment, sitting crisscross on the ground, his arms crossed as well, his eyebrows furrowed as he stared angrily out at the bunny bouncing from place to place. How do I eat the bunny? Maybe the feeling of being hungry. Okay, let's give that a try, Taleon said as he got back up to his feet. Taleon tried to focus on the feeling of being hungry, spending somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 20 minutes trying to focus on it, whilst trying to direct the demonic energy towards his head and stomach. But nothing seemed to be working. No matter how much he concentrated, it didn't seem to have any effect. It was at that point that Rico's power popped into Taleon's head. When Rico absorbed demonic energy with her power, she opened her mouth. Maybe that was his problem. He needed to open his mouth so the demonic energy could pour in. If that's how he absorbs demonic energy, his teacher did say he gobbles it up. So Taleon tried opening his mouth and focusing on that sensation of hunger again. He could actually feel his demonic energy beginning to well up in parts of his body as he tried to focus on them, sort of a general warmth in the area. However, he didn't seem to be having any effect, at least for the first few minutes. After which, Taleon began to notice something a bit odd. As he sat there with his mouth open, trying to aim at the rabbit in the distance, he began to take note of a flow of air, not a powerful one. In fact, it was almost undetectable, very slight at best. But if Taleon put his hand in front of his mouth while performing it, he could feel an ever so slight breeze heading towards the direction of his mouth. But it most definitely wasn't strong enough to pull anything in. Honestly, it wasn't even as hard as the flow of air when he was breathing. That seemed far more intense than this. It's not working, Taleon thought to himself. Okay, so maybe it's not hunger, like with Rico, or at least I assume it's hunger with Rico. So what would it be with me? If it's not hunger, then what is it? After that, Taleon spent a great deal of time shifting between different emotions and feelings. He tried anger, frustration, joy, even sadness, but none of them seemed to have very much of an effect, only managing to change the flow in small amounts. The most responsive was actually fear, nearly doubling the flow, but doubling next to nothing still leaves you with much close to next to nothing. At this point, nearly 3 hours had passed, with Taleon standing in the same place and seeming to get nowhere. "Ah!" Taleon shouted, rubbing his head furiously. "Why can't I do it? Stupid power." "Gobble up the bunny, Taleon." "Yeah, like it's just easy to do." "Oh, it's all right, Taleon. It's your own ability. You'll figure it out," Taleon said mockingly, making fun of his teacher, in a display of both frustration and annoyance with the current run of events. "Ugh, I bet his powers aren't this difficult. He just has that wispy fog stuff. I bet you he just pictures whatever he wants and it just pops into life. Picture a bunny, get a bunny. Picture a ball, get a ball. Ugh, I wish my powers were that simple. If it were, I would have already figured it out," Taleon said, his arms crossed furiously as he looked back towards his teacher, who still seemed to be working with Rico. Rico, at the time, was steadily floating up and down, still firmly affixed to the ball and chain that his teacher had produced and strapped her to keep her from floating away. Rico would float off of the ground, hover about 5 feet, and then lower back down again and repeat the process. She seemed to be getting a hang of it, and at least from as far as Taleon could tell, her fear of it was starting to dwindle, at least a bit. She didn't look nearly as terrified as when it first happened. Once again, as he stared at the chain and ball attached to Rico, he found himself wishing that his powers were as simple to use, or at least as simple as he perceived using those powers would be. It was at that point that Taleon was actually struck with something. Something that felt like a flash, a memory. The memory of that large entity dwarfing over him, about to swallow him up. The one that his teacher had produced during their first day of training. But it wasn't one of the memories that he could actually recall. Instead, it seemed to be a flash from after, from when he couldn't remember anything, when he was apparently in this monstrous state. It was hazy at best, and felt difficult to try to recall. Even after it flashed before him, trying to pull it back seemed hard. But in that flash, Taleon could see that monster dwarfing over him. And though the memory was fuzzy, he did remember a feeling, a single feeling from that instant, the moment that he could see, not clearly as the memory was still choppy, but he suddenly saw the beast being pulled in towards him by a strong flow of wind, and he remembered a word, or more like a set of words. Honestly, it was more like a feeling that he could simply put words to. A feeling that seemed to translate to need. A need for strength. Taleon couldn't remember much else. No matter how many times he tried to picture it in his head, it was simply a few frames of that creature being pulled towards him in a gust of wind. And that same overwhelming feeling, a need for strength. Wait a second, is that how it works? Taleon thought to himself. The feeling that I need in order to use the power. Is it a need for strength? A desire to have more power? To be stronger than I am? Is that what fuels it? Taleon thought to himself, as he turned around to once again look at the bunny running around in the distance.